The Montgomery Bus Boycott. Let's look at the vocabulary words first. Boycott, an organized refusal to use, buy, or participate in something as a form of protest. Nonviolence, the refusal to use violence or other physical force in response to something, such as an unfair law. Compassion, concern for the distress of others. Violated, failed to obey a law or other rule. Strategy, a careful plan to achieve a goal or solve a problem. Before we read, let's look at the pictures on this page. On the left-hand side, you'll see a picture of a bus. The caption underneath says, "The bus on which Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat is in the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan." On the right side of the page, you'll see a picture of a woman. The caption says, "Parks in 1955 at the beginning of the Montgomery Bus Boycott. Martin Luther King Jr. is in the background." Let's read. The date was December 1st, 1955. The place was Montgomery, Alabama. A 42-year-old African-American seamstress boarded a public bus, weary from a long day of work. She took a seat behind the front rows, which were reserved for white people. After a few stops, the bus filled up. No empty seat was available when a white man boarded the bus. At the time, Montgomery law required African Americans to give up their seat if a white person wanted it. Many laws in the South called for Black people to be treated unfairly. Laws also kept Black and white people separate, a practice called segregation. Segregation was the law in housing, schools, jobs, transportation, and public places. Black people had poorer homes, schools, and jobs. On buses, the front seats were set aside for whites, and the back seats were for Blacks. That day, the bus driver ordered the seamstress to stand at the back of the bus so the white man could sit. She refused. She didn't argue with the bus driver or become angry. She just stayed seated. The bus driver called the police, who arrested her. Her name was Rosa Parks. Her courage helped launch the civil rights movement, the struggle for equal rights for Americans of every race. Parks fully expected to be arrested for refusing to give up her seat on the bus as a protest against segregation. She was a member of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, an organization that works for the equality of African Americans. The NAACP wanted to challenge Montgomery's unfair bus system, and Parks's arrest was the perfect opportunity. African American leaders called for a boycott of the city's buses. They asked Black people not to ride the buses to protest Parks's arrest and trial. The boycott began on December 5th, 1955, the same day as her trial. The day the boycott began, African American leaders formed the Montgomery Improvement Association, MIA. They chose a young pastor named Martin Luther King Jr. as the organization's president. The MIA decided that the boycott would continue until the city agreed to certain demands. At first, there were 3 demands: courtesy on the part of the bus drivers toward all passengers, hiring Black bus drivers for mostly Black routes, and first-come, first-served seatings for all passengers, with whites entering through the front door and Blacks entering through the back door. Later, the demands were expanded to include a complete end to segregation on public buses. Inside the brackets are a quote from Rosa Parks. "At the time I was arrested, I had no idea it would turn into this. It was just a day like any other day. The only thing that made it significant was that the masses of people that joined in." Rosa Parks. The boycott caused great hardship for African Americans, but they stayed strong and united. Many walked, while others shared rides, took taxis, or rode bicycles. Although they had just cause to be angry about Montgomery's unfair laws, King encouraged nonviolence. He also urged compassion towards those who defended segregation. In a speech during the boycott, he said nonviolence means avoiding not only the external physical violence, but also internal violence of spirit. You not only refuse to shoot a man, but you refuse to hate him. The bus company lost a great deal of money as a result of the boycott, since close to 3/4 of its riders were African American. Still, the city refused to give in to the demands. The city and many of its citizens also tried to stop the boycott. More than 80 boycott leaders, including King, were arrested in early 1956. The homes of King and another leader were bombed. Still, the boycott continued through most of 1956. Finally, in November, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that segregation on public buses violated the Constitution. The boycott officially ended on December 20th, 1956, more than a year after it began. The bus boycott successfully ended segregation on public buses, and it also accomplished much more. It called national and international attention to the struggle for equality and justice in the United States. In addition, it set a powerful example of a successful nonviolent mass protest. That strategy was used again and again during the Civil Rights Movement, and it helped bring about equality under the law for people of every race. On the right-hand side, you'll see an infographic titled "The Montgomery Bus Boycott in Numbers." Let's read. Rosa Parks was fined $10 plus $4 in court fees for refusing to give up her seat. More than 70% of Montgomery's bus patrons were African American. More than 200 people offered their car for a carpool. About 100 pickup stations operated within Montgomery. Over 50,000 protest flyers were distributed to announce the first day of the boycott. Montgomery City Lines lost between $30,000 and $40,000 in bus fares each day during the boycott. The boycott lasted for 381 days.